everyone. My name is Alan Cross. I do the ongoing history of new music for a bunch of radio stations across Canada. And I am a lifelong Rush fan. As a matter of fact, the second show I ever saw in my life was Rush in Ampeg Arena with Max Webster opening in September 1978. And later on, I would take everybody over to my house during lunch hour at school, and I would play them records. And one day we got a record called Permanent Waves. And I'm reading the liner notes, and at the bottom of a song called The Spirit of Radio, it says, dedicated to the spirit of radio, alive and well and living in Brampton so far. And I thought, wow, that's about a radio station. Wouldn't it be cool to work there one day? So an opportunity like this is kind of like a full circle for me. I have gone to see this band all over the world. I live in Oakville, so I'm finally glad they've come to me. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Geddy. Before we begin, I'd like to thank the Oakville Center for the Performing Arts for putting this on, the Oakville Public Library, Gear Music, and also Different Drummer Books. Of course, you all have books, or you're going to get books, and we're going to have them all signed a little bit later on after the Q&A. Now, I need to ask, I ran into you on Saturday, sort of. And there was an event up in Richmond Hill called Cosmo Music Fest. And you were doing a book signing there. I just happened to be outside the tent where your SUV pulled up, and I saw you through the windshield. Oh, there's Geddy, great, he's going to be here to sign his book. And then the driver's side door opens, and out pours Dave Grohl.
Yeah, so
you're telling us that Dave Grohl was your Uber driver for the day?
You know, he's a really good driver. He's a very underrated driver.
What was
he was hanging out.
Why? Can we talk about it, or is that a secret?
Well, not in so many words, but he was hanging out with me for a couple of days.
Well,
so,
when Dave is seen in Toronto, it's usually because he's doing some sort of non-food thing. So,
yes, this was a non-food thing.
Okay, well, we'll see. Anyways.
Tantalizing.
Okay, the book. I'm just going to hold it here. This weighs a ton. And I want to start at the very beginning. Why the bass? Why did you choose that?
Well, as I've told to many people before, I don't think you choose bass. There are very few people choose to be a bass player. It's sort of like being a goalie in Canada, you know. You have to have one. So a group of people say, you be the goalie, or you be the bass player. I was a guitar player in my little garage band, but we hadn't really graduated to the garage yet. We were still in my friend's bedroom. So we were a bedroom band, I guess. And the bass player who was supposed to be playing with us, and this is at age like 14 or something, his parents didn't like him hanging around with us, so they said, you can't be in this band. So we had no bass player, so a vote was taken and I was chosen to be the bass player. So I rose to the occasion, so to speak.
Was this with Alex back then?
No, this is pre-Alex Lifeson. I didn't really know him yet. This was my very first sort of stab at playing a musical instrument.
What was your first bass?
It was a Japanese-produced Kenora bass that I bought for $35 at a mom-and-pop shop at Shepherd and Bathurst in Toronto. And Alex played a Kenora back then too.
I've never even heard of a Kenora.
Well, yes, there's reasons for that. Not one of your elite brands.
What kind of amp would you have had back then, or did you share an amp with a guitar player?
No, I worked many Saturdays at my mom's store to save up money to buy a really fine trainer amp. I had a 215 trainer, and Alex actually, who used to borrow it all the time because that's sort of how I got to know him. He was always borrowing my amp. He went with me the day we bought it, and I remember it was a cold winter day. We took the bus to Warren McQuaid's music store downtown Toronto. We bought this Twin 15 cabinet in the head, and we put it on the bus to take it back. We rode all the way back to Willowdale and pushed it on the ice, because it was pretty icy, back to my room, and I'll never forget that first night having my own magnificent bass amp.
And you must have shook the house off the foundations.
Yep, and I'll never forget the smell of it and the glow of the red
Oh, it would have been a
standby
two-band,
light.
yes.
Yeah.
Was it a two-band?
It was two-band,
Yeah, back then. So when you're growing up, you have been appointed the bass player. Who do you emulate? Who are your bass heroes?
Well, my first bass hero, and in fact, in my neighborhood, if you could play this song by the Rolling Stones called 2120 South Michigan Avenue, which was a little known sort of instrumental song that the Stones did, that had a cool little bass part. That was the bass part you sort of had to know to be considered to be a player in my hood back then. So that's Bill Wyman and that song were sort of my first look at bass players. And Brian Wilson was another super early bass player. But I used to travel to my mom's store where I worked on Saturdays, as I said, and there was always Motown playing on the radio in those days. And the fantastic bass parts of James Jamerson, Carol Kay, people like that, those were insidious. And I think in looking back to those days, I think they really did influence me quite a bit.
Would you have been into Jack Bruce or any of the heavier sort of bands coming out of the UK?
Yeah, certainly when Cream arrived, yeah, they were huge. And I was a big fan of theirs, and Jack Bruce was a real inspiration for me.
So you had the Kenora. When did you start acquiring more?
Well, I saved up enough money eventually, and this is now, properly in the early Rush band, and I saved up enough to buy my first Fender. It was a Fender Precision bass, 1968 Precision.
Was that the one that you bought in a pawn shop someplace?
No, that was my 72 Jazz. This I bought, I can't remember where I bought it. I think the same kind of mom and pop store. But the guy told me it was a real workhorse, and he was right. And I used that through all the early high school gigs, all the early bar gigs, those 5 sets a night at the Gasworks, and all those clubs.
So, how many bass guitars do you own?
As of today?
Yes.
I don't know, Scully's in here somewhere, he knows the exact number.
You actually don't
It's
know.
about 280, it's about 280. That's something to applaud or call a doctor about it.
Let's back up just a little bit. You have a self-confessed problem with collecting things. So when you collect something, you go all in.
Yes.
What was the first thing you collected?
Stamps. Of course. I had sort of inherited my dad's stamp collection when I was a kid, and I sort of met some other fellow nerds in public school that also liked stamps, so we would nerd out over stamps.
And then?
Then vinyl.
Okay, that's...
When I became a music lover, I started buying vinyl, of course, because that's the only way you could buy music in those days. And I amassed a fairly nice collection of great progressive music and all my favorite bands, which I still have.
Yeah.
But so vinyl was the thing that turned me on to being a musician.
When did baseballs come into the picture?
Baseball settled in with me in the late 70s as I was touring America, and we were playing sometimes 42 shows in a night in different cities. And you'd be driving and sleeping and driving and sleeping and wake up around 2 in the afternoon. and plead with the kitchen at the Holiday Inn in Springfield, Missouri, to send you up some scrambled eggs. And while I was having my breakfast, you'd turn on TV in Middle America, and you'd find One Life to Live, or General Hospital, or the Cubs on WGN, or the Braves on TBS. So I started watching baseball, and I got completely enamored in it, and it was a great escape for me on the road. I decided I was going to go to all the ball fields and learn the game. And then I got sort of hooked on the history of the game. And then I thought, wouldn't it be cool to have a baseball signed by Babe Ruth? And I think that's sort of fatal last words for most baseball collectors. And it sort of grew from there.
And how many baseballs did you end up with?
Well, I don't know the exact number. Even Scully out here doesn't know the number of that. But I have a substantial collection of signed baseballs.
So you still have them? Didn't
Yes.
you donate a bunch?
I donated over 400 baseballs they were single signed baseballs by Negro League players, and some of these were very obscure players. And I donated that collection to the Negro League Museum in Kansas City. It needed to be there. It didn't need to be in my hands. It needed to be on display there.
Well, between baseballs and bases, it could be worse. You could be into collecting wine.
Yeah, that could happen to a guy.
Okay, let's do the wine collection. What do you got?
Well, so this is the story. Alex was into wine much before I was. And he got very nerdy about it. And I thought, well, that's cool. He likes all these Gewürztraminer and all these obscure grape varietals. And so we were just starting to become a headliner around America, and promoters were suddenly, they went from treating us sort of meh to, what can we get for the guys in the band? So Alex told our road manager, whenever they asked that question, to tell them fine wine. So at the end of the night, there would be 3 bottles of fine wine. Now, I didn't drink that much wine in those days, so I collected mine and put them in a box, and at the end of each run, I would bring them home with me. And I put them in a little wine fridge at home and forgot about them. And fast forward a number of years, and I finally moved into a home, and I decided I'm going to build a little modest wine cellar. So I was putting these wines that I'd been gathering over the years away, and I started reading up about them. And you really cannot read about wine without wanting to taste it. It's almost impossible. It's like a terrible tease to read about the complexity and the fruit and the blah, blah, blah. So I started drinking these wines, and I enjoyed the experience. And you got a little high to boot. So I started meeting other friends, people that were in the wine world, and that's a very sort of infectious group and a gregarious group. And I became I went down into the wine rabbit hole, so to speak.
Okay, how many bottles do you think you got?
You put me on the spot with these numbers. Well, I have a couple of cellars in the house. Let's put it.
Okay, we'll just leave it at that then, shall we? Let's get back to guitars. Let's talk about the kinds of basses that you have acquired.
Okay.
Give me some ideas of some of the. Well, all of them must be special in some way or another to you.
Yeah, I mean, some of them are obviously what we call holy grails, rare, super rare for one reason or another. Others are just super cool. I mean, I like to think we don't just buy basses because they're basses, but because they have something about them that's interesting. I started this whole thing as a result of an offer that was made to me before we began a tour. I guess it's about 7-8 years ago now. A local store in Los Angeles wanted a piece of gear that belonged to me, to represent Rush in their store's sort of Hall of Fame that they had. And they offered me a vintage bass, and at the time I was sort of saying to my tech Scully, it was like, well, man, I don't really collect basses. What, he knows a lot about vintage instrument. What's this all about? And, we went back and forth, and I started reading up on these instruments, and I noticed that they had a 1953 Fender Precision bass as one of the basses I could have traded for. And that struck me for two reasons. Being a wine guy, you're always looking for vintages from your birth year, and 53 is my birth year. I realized that I knew so little about the creation and the evolution of the instrument that I've been holding in my hands for 40 years.
Well, the bass is one of those instruments that has not been very well documented. I mean, we can read all about guitars and synthesizers and even drums, but the bass has gotten short shrift over the decades.
It has. I mean, the information's out there, but it's in small publications that nothing really profound. There's no real profound compendium out there. So I said to Scully, wouldn't it be cool to collect, a handful of basses representing some of the guys that I truly admired as a kid, like Jack Bruce's EB3, or, a P bass like Brian Wilson played, or 4001S like Chris Squire first played, etc. A Hofner that Paul McCartney played. And that's how it started. But with me, there's no small measures, like once I started reading about them, and I'm what they call a completist. When I start collecting something, if it's wine, if there's a vintage missing, it's like, well, it's a gaping hole. With baseballs, I wanted every player that was in the Hall of Fame. It's just a sickness, I think. And the same thing with basses. I want the story to be complete, or as complete as makes sense, So I started looking for all these various instruments. Some of them were really important by virtue of their age and the period they represent. Some of them are just fantastically creative, eccentric instruments. And some of them are lesser known instruments that have a particular, beauty about them in the fact that they're accessible instruments, but people don't know a lot about them. So that's the attitude I took to the collection.
Do you have basses that were played by famous people or people that you admire?
I have a couple, but it wasn't what I set out to do. I have a bass that's very dear to my heart that was owned by John Entwistle.
Oh.
It wasn't one of his major instruments that he played on stage, but it was one of his instruments that he had in his home studio. And I became friends with a gentleman who helped John Entwistle build his own collection. He was a big collector as well. And he sold me this bass, and he said to me that this was his couch bass, right? Everybody has a couch bass. If you go into my house right now, there's a bass near my couch where I watch the baseball game. So I can, when the Jays are losing by 8 runs, I can and I can keep my fingers in shape. So everybody, and apparently John walked around the house playing constantly. He always had a bass in his hands. So that's a very important bass for me. And
are there basses? There must be basses that are valuable for odd reasons, like maybe the stock is different from any other vintage or whatever. Do you have those?
Yeah, sure. I mean, there are an infinite number of bits of minutia that signify a rare bass, and the deeper into the hobby, they call it a hobby, you get, the more profound these things mean. Color is a huge deal because basses were generally, like vintage guitars, basses were generally made in either blonde color or a sunburst color. Those were stock colors. So anytime you wanted something other than that, it had to be custom ordered. So collectors of guitars and basses look for those custom orders, and from certain periods, a custom order, like in the case of Fender, for example. Anything before 65 is considered the pre-CBS years, before they sold the company to CBS. And those custom colors from that period are highly sought after.
Do they sound better? Do the pre-CBS guitars sound better?
Well, you know, this is really a subject that I go into in the book, and it's a controversial subject, but the short answer is yes, I think they do sound better. But they sound better in a particular way that represents that period.
When you were playing and touring, what would you look for a stage bass, for a performance bass?
I looked for basses that gave me the tone that I heard in my head that I felt wanted to represent me as a player. Something that was my own identifiable sound. And I didn't collect because I didn't want anything to get in my way of finding that sound or developing that sound or evolving that sound. So I started with a 4001, Rickenbacker 4001, because you know Chris Squire was a big hero of mine, and
Not a lot of people played that bass.
well, a few did, but back then, the one that I really was aware of was him, and the first time I'd ever seen one, or a Rickenbacker electric bass, was in the hands of Paul McCartney, of course, on that worldwide broadcast they did, All You Need Is Love. Yeah. So that's the first time, wow, what a strange looking creature it was to me. But when I became a Yes freak, I got, slip of the tongue. I loved Chris Squire's sound, and I loved John Entwistle's sound before that. And I mean, he had dabbled with those, but John Entwistle played pretty much every bass you could imagine. But it was that twangy, that grungy, that, you know, bottomy yet, you know, slightly obnoxious sound I was after.
Yeah, like what we heard on Roundabout?
Yes, you know, really dry.
Yeah.
And so that sound was created by Rickenbacker. So of course, when I got my first royalty check, my first advance in 1974, I went straight to Lionel McQuaid's, and there was a black 4001 hanging on the wall that became mine, and that was a very exciting day for me.
And do you still have that bass?
I do, yes.
And how many shows do you think you used that one at?
Oh, I don't know, quite a lot. From 74, probably every show from 1974 to 1978 and beyond. At 77, I got a second black one, and so that I would go back and forth with them because I was really wearing the first one out. We were doing a lot of shows every year back then. And, you know, the first thing you do is plug it in, and you expect to sound like Chris Squire, and guess what? You can't sound like Chris Squire. Only Chris Squire sounds like Chris Squire. But I think the development of your own sound is a lot about failing. I think, in a way, originality is sort of your desire to be a thing, but finding out that you can't be that thing, and so you try to do the best with what you have, and then you combine your own taste and your own personality and your own broad sense of influence, and that's what creates your own identity. And I think, you know, so the 4001 was a tool for me in that development.
You were always a busy player, in the sense that there were a lot of notes in Rush songs at the bottom end.
Yeah.
And how did you develop that playing style? I mean, that's very John Entwistle-ish, that's very Chris Squire-ish. But even if you listen to a song like "In the Mood," I mean, you're from the first album, you would never play just like a running bass line. You would never like lean on an E and just go for a whole verse.
Well, I tell people that I got paid by the notes, so. But that's not actually true. I wish it were true. You know, I was in a three-piece band, and in a three-piece band, when the guitar player starts to solo, the rhythm guitar disappears. So it gets empty all of a sudden. So I felt my job was to do the job of two instruments. My job was to be the bass that knitted with the rhythm section, knitted with the drums, and created a foundation. But at the same time was busy enough so they didn't miss the fact that the rhythm guitar suddenly was gone. And that's how I started playing, even in small clubs and high schools. I started filling in the spaces, and then as our technology developed and Alex was able to use various effects to give a broader sound to his solos that didn't depend so much on the busy bass. By then it was too late. I was a busy bass player, so I was going to put every note where I could fit it in.
Yeah, and not only that, you had a mountain of keyboards and foot pedals with you.
Yeah, by that period, yeah, we were way over the top, and we were trying to be the world's smallest symphony orchestra.
What do we have on stage here? This is only obviously a very small
Yes,
portion.
we brought a slight selection of tasty goodies here. Some of my basses are right now in Calgary. We just opened an exhibit there of 26 instruments. That's going to run for a few months at the National Music Center. So if you're in Calgary, check it out. It's a cool place, the National Music Center. They have some amazing synthesizers.
Oh, yeah.
And they have the Rolling Stones mobile indoors. You can go in and visit it. I mean, it's great stuff there. But on the stage, what do we have here? If I may stand. So on this side, we have, on the very end, very rare instrument made by a gentleman named Tony Zemaitis. That's the metal front bass that you see at the end. That was made in 1982, I believe, 82 or 83. Tony Zemaitis was a fascinating character. He started making custom guitars, and they were discovered by Keith Richards and George Harrison, and you know, that period of rock and roller, and they became, everybody had to have a Tony Zemaitis instrument. He made far less basses than he made guitars, so to find a bass is quite special. I had bought one from Bob Daisley, who plays bass for Rainbow, earlier, but then this one came along, and that's sort of in its prime in the early 80s. So that's called the Geisha, because you can see the engraving on it. Well, you probably can't see from where you're sitting. There's a geisha girl engraved on it, so that's why it's called a geisha. The next is a really cool bass, and this is an example of some of the things that were being made in Italy in the early 60s, and that's an Echo violin bass. Les Claypool of Primus fame and Lennon Claypool Delirium fame, he plays an Echo violin bass. Then we have a jazz bass from '66 in Fire Mist Gold, which is a pretty rare color. That's part of the Color Frenzy. This is a bass I played on the R40 tour. This odd-looking red bass is a pretty rare creature. It's called Hofner Solid Bass, and it's from 1961. And very few of these have ever been used, but I found it in LA when I was in rehearsals for that tour. And we plugged it in, and the amount of bottom end that comes from that thing is just insane. So I use it at the end of the show on the R40 tour. Behind there, I don't know if you want me to explain every single one.
Do it.
So behind there is an Ampeg scroll bass. These are anachronistic looking beasts. And this was done by Ampeg, and the owner of the company at the time really wanted the instrument to be a replacement for the big stand-up double bass. So he developed this style of bass, and very few rockers have used it. Rick Danko played one, Boz Burrell played one, not this exact model, but similar enough. So it's on the eccentric scale. It's definitely on the far end of the scale, but I think they're just strange and wonderful creatures. And it is sort of a creature. This is a classic 1959 Fender Precision bass with what they call the slab rosewood neck. And that is one of the most beautiful basses to play. And this guy here is a rare beast. Whenever you find the first generation of Gibson Thunderbirds were of what they call the reverse style. That's with the big horn pointing down. And they were terribly unsuccessful. I mean, people really didn't take to them. But fast forward, and that's what makes a bass rare today, is, you know, the failures become quite sought after, especially when they failed just because they were not the style of the moment. So this bass is a great sounding, it's in a rare color, and to find custom color reverse Thunderbirds is really, you gotta be fortunate to find those. And this is one of the Rickenbacker 4005s, you know, the semi-hollow bodies they made. This is in burgundy glow color. These are a bit unwieldy to play, but they're amazing instruments. Oh, here we go again on this side. That bass you asked me about, my very first Rickenbacker, that's this guy. It used to be black. Yes, let's applaud the bass. Yeah, this one has been through the wars with me. I sweated so much on this bass that most of the paint came off. So in a fit of madness, I told my tech at the time, I think we should just strip it. And I've since then learned that that's a big no-no. Just keep the war wounds, you know, because they tell a story. So even though it's not black, that was my first black bass. That's the one that I bought at Long McQuaid. This is a delicious sounding Hofner 501 Violin Bass. Now that's a lot of numbers, but basically Paul McCartney used this bass, this kind of bass, not exactly this model. Pretty similar, but they become associated with the Beatles, for obvious reasons, and they do sound great. They have a very different kind of bottom end sound, and that's Paul McCartney's sound is based on this instrument. This is a super, super rare beast from 1961. It's the first iteration of the jazz bass that Leo Fender invented in 1960. And it came with those kind of funny looking, what they call concentric pots. But this is the color that's called Fiesta Red. The Brits call it pink, salmon pink, even though there is no salmon pink Fender color, but they like to call it. My friend Alan Rogan sold this to me, and he always refers to it as the pink bass. But it's a fantastic color, and it's been through the wars. And he told me the story that he thinks he saw this very bass in the hands of the bass player that eventually became the bass player for Roxy Music, way back in the north of England, where he's from. This is a Gibson EB3. Like my hero Jack Bruce used. It's not his bass. Boy, I would love to have that, but these are really iconic basses. And the Gibson basses are famous for their big bottomy, or some would call muddy sound. There is the second iteration of the Gibson Thunderbird. That was produced from 65 onwards. They thought they would improve it. In my view, they're pretty good, but the originals were the thing to find. So while all these basses were being invented in Sweden, they were making these sparkly things. And you can see that the Hagstrom company at one point must have been making accordions, because this looks like an accordion meets an electric bass. But they're really rare to find now, and I think they're great looking basses. And whenever we have one of these basses that looks better than it sounds, we put them in the category of, won't they look good in my living room? This beauty, this is honestly one of the most beautiful double necks that I've ever seen. This one we took on the R40 tour, and it traveled around with us, and this was lovingly restored, and I think it's from 1978 originally, but I mean, just look at it, it just, wow, it just glows. That became an instrument that was identified with me back in the days of playing Xanadu and stuff like that. The double neck period. And this is a bass that used to belong to Bob Daisley of Rainbow and Ozzy, and a great collector and a fantastic guy. And this was his Lake Placid Blue Fender P bass from 1963. Just a classic, great bass in wonderful condition. This color is one of my favorite colors, and to see them when they still actually look blue and haven't faded green is pretty rare. But anyway, that's enough nerding out on basses.
So, if the house is burning down, you can grab 2.
2 bottles of wine. two basses.
Let's assume that the wine is in the basement and it's going to be fine.
Right.
But which two basses would you run out with?
Boy, that's a really tough question. I think I would have to grab my 72 black jazz bass that I've been using as my number one for the last, I don't know, since Counterparts, since 1994. It's been my number one bass. The second one I would grab, boy, I would be in a tizzy trying to figure that one out, but probably would be my 62 Phone Green jazz bass. That's sort of becoming my new number one. So those are two basses that I probably couldn't live without.
You've had these appraised, of course, for insurance reasons. What's the most valuable bass that you have?
Well, value, really depends. The instruments that I play on stage, obviously, and have helped me develop my sound, have the most
Intrinsic value.
Yeah, value, but probably the Zemeckis bass on the end there, because he made so few of them, those basses are like, a needle in a haystack to find them, especially from that period, and they're quite expensive.
Do you ever have other guys come and say, I'm going on tour, I could use a bass or two?
No, not yet. I'm expecting that. I mean, a lot of people won't take vintage basses out on tour, and this is the point I make in the book. And when we were doing the last tour, we took 27 of them out, because a lot of people are afraid of nicking them up, and I think they're made to be played. I think they're great to use them and make them come to life, and I think that forgives the nick or two that they might get in the process, that they have a story to tell.
Well, okay, let's talk about some stories. So this is this is heavy, it's thick, and it is truly beautiful. So let's talk about the genesis and the creation of this coffee table book about basses.
Okay. It's 9 pounds.
Yeah, okay. So
It's like mailing a baby.
So let's. So how did this all come together? So there's you, there's Richard, who's your photographer.
Yes.
Daniel Wirschler, who did the text.
Yeah.
And then
Co-wrote with me. Yeah.
co-wrote with you, and then Scully, your guitar tech,
Yeah.
your bass tech.
Yeah.
When did you decide that you needed to do this?
Well, Scully and I were on this journey together, what I like to call the mad journey. And we were gathering more basses, but what we were gathering as well was obscure bits of information that you could only know by having all of these in your hands and being able to play them side by side by side. And things that a lot of people don't discover. Plus, we were finding stories out about previous owners that were charming, or coming from strange places, or lovingly handed over. Like a lot of the people we buy instruments from, they're happy to part with the instrument, but it's an emotional parting, to say goodbye to their instrument. And even though these guys are not famous guys, this was their passion. Maybe they had a 9-to-5 job, and they can only play on the weekends or on Wednesday nights on pub night or something like this. But this was their, everything. So I love those stories. I love to see the well used. Like if you look at that 61 pink bass, you see that's lived a life, that bass. So we started gathering all these stories, and we tossed the idea around that, we should write these down. Maybe someone would find this interesting. It's guitarchaeology in a way, unearthing relics from the past. So we toyed with that idea until we started having critical mass in terms of basses, and we said, yeah, we really have to do a book and justify this madness. So I was talking to my friend Daniel in England, and I said, would you help me? You're a writer, you're well-spoken, and he's a clean man, and help me wrestle the words and put together something that sounds like me talking to you guys right now. That's the tone we sought to achieve in the book. I didn't want it to be didactic. I wanted it to be a conversation about the wonderful electric bass.
How many of your basses are in this book? All of them?
Yeah, those are all men.
And how many pictures were taken to put this book together?
Well, when Richard, amazing photographer, lovely guy, we basically set up, my wife was very generous, I might add, by letting us set up in her art room. She paints, and she has a room at the top of our house, and she said, well, you know, we looked at that room and said, yeah, that would be pretty good because it's big and has natural light. And she said, yeah, sure, no problem. But she didn't realize we'd be up there for over 8 months. You know? And then eventually it was like, can I get that room back, please? Well, we just have to shoot 2 more basses that just came in. And to answer your question, after the first round of all the photography, we had over 30,000 photographs.
Oh, God. And
Yeah,
how
that's a lot.
many? It is. How many made the book? Do you know?
There's about 1,100 photographs in the book, so the editing process was quite something. And the first manuscript of the book we delivered our editor, she made these comments to me. She said, first of all, I've never received a manuscript that was 845 pages. Secondly, she said, you know, your passion for the instruments plays out on a page. I didn't expect that. And the other thing is that it's funny. And I really didn't expect that. And I said, well, if you can't joke about these things, why are we here on the planet, to quote Bobby Bittman? So that's what we ended up with, and that we went down this crazy rabbit hole and came out with this beautiful book.
I can't imagine how much time it took to do the layout, because you flip through each page and each page is different, and on the glossy paper and the different types of print and it's a gorgeous book.
Well, thank you. Well, you know, we had a great team of people. The team at Harper Design in New York were fantastic, especially helping me learn how to cut a book down from 800 pages to 408 pages. I literally moved into their offices for 2 weeks and worked with them in these little open plan booths, cutting the book down, and with the editor and my managing designer at the company, and our book designer, Paul Keppel, who works independently out of Philadelphia, was a huge help in the end, and he really had a great eye for balance. And once we finished round 1 and got down to the pages that we needed, then we had to go into round 2, where we had to make sure the pages weren't repetitive or redundant, and we kept the information subtle. I wanted people to be able to open the book and just look at the pictures if they want. And the information is in there if you choose to read about it. We didn't want to hit you over the head with dry history, so we tried to make it as entertaining.
Yeah, it's something that you can browse through, or it's something that you can really dive into. And it seems to have struck a chord with a lot of people, because not only is it the #1 best-selling nonfiction book in Canada, according to the Globe and Mail, it is also the best-selling book, period, according to the Globe and Mail. So, anybody who would have suggested that a book on bass, who is going to want it? But then again, Rush fans are not normal.
This is true.
We tend, if you have something available, we'll buy it.
Yeah, bless your heart.
This is only one version of the book. There is another version of the book that is for the Ultra Rabid.
Well, I mean, I made a couple of different editions. Some of them, the Ultra edition, which came with a bunch of bells and whistles and beautiful little mini guitar cases, that sold out pretty fast. But we do have another edition that is leather bound. I mean, this is a beautiful material. I mean, it looks like leather, it feels like leather, but it's not. So we have a leather-bound version that has a few other touches and a few other knickknacks and some free stuff, and it comes signed. But I'm trying to do as many signings as I can in a sort of a random way, and that actually has been really fun because I get to spend 2 minutes with some people that have been fans for many years, and it's nice to have that face-to-face, you know.
Before we get to some questions and answers, I have one final question. David Gilmour is famously selling off 120 guitars from the Pink Floyd collection, including the famous Black Strat that he used on everything. And he says he's selling it off because these are beautiful instruments and they deserve to be played. Is there going to come a time when, just like with the baseballs, you're going to say these guitars deserve to be played?
Undoubtedly. If not in my lifetime, I'm sure my kids will feel that way. You know, right now it's hard to part with them because I'm still collecting them, and they right now they mean a lot to me. But yeah, I'm sure there'll come a time when we'll thin the herd a bit and pass them on so other people can enjoy the story of it.
Just rotate them next to the couch.
That's right.
Yeah. All right, let's here's your opportunity to ask a couple of questions. We have some people out there with microphones. I can't see a single thing. Nope, there we go, that's better. We got about 15 minutes for this, so who wants to go first? Oh, we have one here and one in the middle over there. Okay, here we go.
If you're pointed to, stand up so he can find you.
Yeah.
This gentleman here.
Okay, row 4, yes. Here.
Passing the baton.
Bit of an off-topic question, but I've always asked myself the same question. Going back 30, 40, 50 years ago when you first started out, and God forbid that you guys were a failure, what would Geddy Lee be doing today as a profession?
I'd probably be working in Times Square discount in Newmarket. My mother's a
Thank you. So what has playing the bass taught you that can transcend all aspects of life?
Well, that's just a small question, isn't it? Look, anything you set your heart and mind to and spend 40 years working at changes you. It's brought the world to me. It's taught me about working at something until you feel like you're pretty good at it. And it's brought me to every country in the world. It's educated me. It's given me confidence. It's introduced me through thick and thin, different experiences of life that I hope have made me a better, more interesting person, and a more generous one, I hope. So this is just what life is, and it doesn't matter if you're playing the bass or working on at anything that you love, anything you pour your heart into. The feedback of that experience is making you a better person and hopefully giving you a rich life. So, thanks for asking.
Hi, Geddy. I hope you're not offended. I wasn't thinking when I wore my Roger Waters t-shirt.
Roger Waters doesn't offend.
You're not only one of the greatest bass players in the world, but I want to recognize you as one of the most distinctive vocalists in the world as well.
Thank you.
And I would like to, not so much a question, but a comment, that you once wrote that the glittering prizes and endless compromises shatter the illusion of integrity. And I would like to thank Rush for never selling out, ever.
Hello.
Oh, okay, back there.
Oh, hello. You're awesome, by the way. As someone who owns only one bass with a huge crack down the back, but which he nevertheless loves very deeply, I would like to know, what's the most damaged instrument you've ever played on a gig or on stage?
The most damaged instrument?
Yeah, like have you ever picked up one with a huge crack on it and played?
Well, I have a few that have what we call buckle rash to the extreme. There's a lot of instruments in my collection that are not pristine. If you look at this one, this beautiful 59, that's really, it's made someone happy for a really long time. And all that blood, sweat, and tears has left its mark. So, yeah, I mean, you can play damaged basses. As long as they make their noise, that's all you want, right?
Hi, Geddy.
Hi.
Sans the guitar and bass, what else would Geddy be playing professionally today, in the past? What other instruments are you fascinated by and even have played?
Well, I pretended to be a keyboard player for a while.
Besides that, Mark.
Thankfully, I outgrew that. I have most admiration for the violin. I think the violin and the piano are the two most expressive and complex instruments. So I have great admiration for people that play both of those. But I think bass players are just more fun.
Thank you.
Do you have all those old keyboards in storage someplace?
I have some of them. As you know, keyboards come and go in terms of the trends, and I've donated a lot to schools. When I don't use a thing, I'd rather it go to somebody to learn on. So we try to find a good place, a good home for some of those things.
But how about those old analog ones from the 70s, early 80s?
I have a couple. I don't really know what's still hanging around the warehouse, but I don't use them at home anymore. I have this thing called plugins now.
Oh, right. Okay.
We've got someone up there. Sorry, go ahead.
Hi, Geddy. I'm Jen. I'm from Hamilton, Ontario. I just want to let you know I turned 47 on Friday. This is my birthday present.
Oh, happy birthday.
Thank you. The album Vapor Trails is my all-time favorite album, and it reminds me of a tragic time in my life. In 2011, I was attacked by a random stranger, and I spent 2012 climbing back, and the album Vapor Trails, I know it's been your first album after Neil's losses, and the album, it helped me to deal with the pain and deal with the rebuilding myself again, and I'm very glad that I'm here tonight. This is my dream come true, and I just want to say, you, Alex, Neil, thank you so much. The Vapor Trails album saved my life. Thank you.
Oh my God, what a story. Thank you so much for sharing the people. I mean, the greatest compliment any artist can get is when they're told their music helped someone else. So I thank you for sharing that with us. That's incredible.
First of all, Geddy, thanks for bringing out your bass collection. It was a big thrill to see those and for you to give us the walkthrough.
Oh, my pleasure.
As someone who is sort of a similar vintage to you, I managed to grow up through the 70s and the 80s, and we had a chance to play in rock bands and see rock bands in local clubs and bars. It seems that that's kind of a thing of the past. What's your thoughts on the state of young kids starting bands, playing in bands, and for young kids to be able to go see local bands?
Well, it's an interesting question. You know, what I see, and certainly is proven to be true at these signings I've been doing, are so many young musicians, like younger than I was when I started playing. There seems to be a great amount of support coming from the new generation of parents that support their kids playing an instrument. So I have quite an optimistic outlook for the future of music, because there's so many players, and hopefully those players will, you know, if there's 10 young players, hopefully at least 3 or 4 of them will develop into something really, really special. So the more the merrier, and I see quite a broad field. And one thing that really excites me is how many young female bass players come to these shows and these signings and share their feelings about the instruments. I mean, that is tremendously exciting, I think. So I think we're in good hands going forward. Yep.
Hi, Geddy.
Hi.
Just wondering.
Oh, wait, 2 people talking at the same time.
Let's go down here.
We'll go down here and then we'll come to you, okay?
Hi, my name is Rush to me, like for the Rush. So, I have a question. How did you think about the name Rush?
How did we think of the name?
Yeah.
Okay, well, this is a sticky subject. Because, let me put it in the cleanest possible terms. It's supposed to represent a rush of excitement.
Hey, Geddy, how you doing?
I'm good.
I'm just wondering, do you have sort of like a Spinal Tap bass? Can't be touched, can't be played, can't be looked at? Those two.
Well, you know, this brings up an interesting point, and something I tried to deal with in the book. There are 2 types of instruments. The quintessential collector is after what we call case queens, or beauty queens, they call them. These are instruments that have spent their lives unplayed, right? So I have examples of that, and they're gorgeous, and they're what we call investment pieces. And people don't generally like to play those because, here's the story, you know, like 50 years ago, as my friend Colin likes to say, Johnny wanted a set of drums for Christmas, but he got a bass guitar. So the bass guitar sat in its case under his bed all this time, and now a collector finds it, and it's like, opens the case and light comes out of the case. It's like the holy grail. But for me, the other side of the coin are these instruments we've been talking about, the warriors, the road warriors. The instruments that have been in the hands of someone, maybe not famous, but someone that was so passionate and loved it and played the hell out of that bass. And generally, those are the basses that are the most fun to play and feel the most worked in. So I try to take a point of view that not to be too precious about the case queens, the beauty queens. Basses are instruments, they should be played. But we do tend to take a little more care with the case queens.
Okay, we'll do one more question, and then we'll get to the signing. Everybody will have 2 minutes with Geddy to have their book personalized. So let's do one more down here.
Hi, Geddy.
Where are you?
I'm down here.
Hi.
I'm Paulo from Brazil.
Oh, welcome.
Well, honored to be here. I'm a small collector of 26 basses, and I have a question about technique.
Okay.
What's your technique for explaining to the wife that you need one more chance?
Well, the technique that I've mastered is don't tell them. They might look at you funny when the back door's open and Scully's humping more and more basses. And just don't explain. Don't complain, don't explain. That's Thank you.
I want to thank you for your time. This has been absolutely fascinating. I know that you want to talk to everybody here with the book, and gosh, I don't know what else to say, but thank you very much for taking the time. Good luck with the book. Good luck with the rest of the tour.
Thank you for coming. Thanks, Alan. Great job.